My name is Claire. I'm 34, and I've spent the last 9 years reading contracts for a living. The kind of contracts most people sign without reading past page 1. So, when my family called me after 2 years of near total silence and asked me to come sign some papers to finally settle things fairly, I should have asked one question before I said yes. Settle what exactly? I didn't ask. I drove 3 hours to my parents' house, walked into the dining room, and found a stack of documents already printed, already tabbed, already waiting for my signature at the bottom of page 6. My mother slid a pen across the table before I'd even sat down and said the words I'd spent my whole career training to hear underneath. It's just a formality, sweetheart. We just need everyone's signature so we can finally move forward as a family. She thought I'd sign it without reading it. She hadn't counted on the fact that I read contracts for breakfast and that page 6 was about to cost her everything she was trying to take from me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to sign, to nod, to trust, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe because what happened at that table is going to stay with you. Let me back up. I'm the middle child of 3. My older brother, Ethan, is 38 and has never held a job longer than 14 months. My younger sister, Paige, is 29 and has been between opportunities since she dropped out of a hospitality program a decade ago. I'm the one who became a lawyer. Corporate contracts, mostly mergers and acquisitions, work at a mid-sized firm downtown. I make good money, not obscene money. Good money, the kind you build slowly, the kind that comes from 6 years of associate hours and one very expensive bar exam I paid for myself. My father built a modest fortune the old-fashioned way. He owned 3 small commercial properties he'd bought in the 90s when the neighborhood was still cheap, and he rented them out for 30 years until they were worth more than the rest of his life combined. When he died 14 months ago, he left behind a will that split everything 3 ways. Equal shares, no surprises, straightforward, except nothing in my family is ever straightforward. 2 years ago, a year before Dad died, I stopped speaking to Ethan and Paige regularly, and my mother by extension, after I refused to co-sign a business loan for Ethan's 3rd failed venture, this one a food truck that lasted 5 months. I said no because I'd already watched him burn through 2 previous sure things, and because I'd learned the hard way that lending money to Ethan wasn't lending. It was donating with extra steps. My mother called me cold. Paige called me jealous of anyone who actually tried things. I went quiet. They went quiet back. Dad and I still talked, just not in front of them. Then Dad died of a heart attack in his sleep, and the silence got worse before it got better, because grief doesn't build bridges in families like mine. It builds new reasons to need money. So when my mother texted me last week, "Can you come Sunday? We want to finally settle the estate properly as a family, no more fighting," I felt something loosen in my chest. I thought maybe finally we were going to be okay. I should have read the room before I read the paperwork. I do this for a living. I know better. I went anyway because some small, stubborn part of me still wanted to believe that family meant something more than a word people use right before they ask you for something. I got to my mother's house at 11 on a Sunday morning. Ethan's truck was in the driveway. Paige's car was behind it. My mother opened the door before I knocked, hugged me tighter than she had in 2 years, and led me straight to the dining room table where a stack of paper sat next to a pen like it had been staged for a photograph. "We had Uncle Rick help us draft something," she said. Uncle Rick is my mother's brother, a man who once tried to sell timeshares out of a strip mall and refers to himself without irony as basically a paralegal. He said this would make everything clean and fair. No lawyers, no fees, no fighting. Just sign here and we can finally move on. No lawyers. Of course, because a lawyer in the room, any lawyer, let alone one who actually practices, would have asked to read the document before anyone touched a pen. I sat down. Ethan wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Paige was scrolling her phone, present, but not really. My mother hovered behind my chair like she was worried I might get up before I signed. I picked up the document, 6 pages, dense with the kind of language that's designed to look official without actually being precise. The telltale sign of someone who's watched a legal drama and typed estate settlement agreement template into a search bar. I started reading from page 1, the way I read everything top to bottom, no skimming. Page 1 was fine. Standard preamble, names, date, a description of the estate, the 3 commercial properties, some savings, a modest modest life insurance payout. Page 2, still fine. A general statement of intent to divide the estate fairly among the surviving children. Page 3 is where it started. A clause under the heading Property Management Transition stated that given my professional obligations and residence outside the immediate family area, I would voluntarily transfer my management rights and decision-making authority over the 3 commercial properties to my brother, who is best positioned to oversee day-to-day operations. I kept reading, my face doing absolutely nothing, because that's a skill you learn in your first year of practice. Never let your expression give away what you've just found. Page 4 assigned Ethan a management fee of 15% of gross rental income off the top before any distribution to the rest of us. Page 5 restructured the ownership itself. Not the equal 3-way split from Dad's actual will, but a new arrangement where Ethan held 50%, Paige held 30%, and I held 20%, with a footnote explaining that this reflected each sibling's current financial need and contribution to family support, which was an almost impressively dishonest way of describing the fact that I was the only one who'd never asked them for a dime. And page 6, the one my mother had already flagged with a little pink sticky arrow, was the signature page. My name, printed, waiting for my signature, directly beneath language that read, by signing below, the undersigned waives any claim to contest, revisit, or challenge the terms of this agreement and acknowledges this agreement as a full and final settlement of all estate matters. A waiver. Buried on page 6, under a sticky arrow, next to a pen someone had clearly already tested to make sure it worked. I set the document down on the table, very gently, and looked up. This isn't Dad's will, I said. My mother's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. It's an update. Dad's will was written years ago. This reflects where everyone actually is now. Dad's will was written 8 months before he died. It's not old, it's current, and it split everything 3 ways equally. No management fees. No waivers. Ethan finally looked up. Claire, come on. You don't even live here. You don't need to be involved in managing the properties. It just makes sense for me to handle that stuff. That's not what this document says. It says you get 15% of gross income before anyone else sees a cent. And it cuts my ownership from 1/3 down to 1/5. That's not management. That's a taking. You're being dramatic, Paige said, not looking up from her phone. I read contracts for a living, I said. This is a very specific kind of dramatic. It's the kind where I recognize exactly what I'm looking at. My mother's hand found the back of my chair. Claire, sweetheart, we just want this to be settled. Your father would have wanted us to stop fighting. Can't you just sign it so we can move forward? There it was, the same 5 words dressed up as peace. Your father would have wanted. Dad, who split everything equally down the middle. In a will he wrote with an actual estate attorney 8 months before he died, apparently now wanted a 15% skim and a signature waiver drafted by a man who sells timeshares. I want to be honest about something, because some of you will understand this. Part of me wanted to sign it. Not because I believed it was fair, I knew exactly what it was, but because I was tired. 2 years of quiet, a father in the ground, a mother who hugged me at the door like she meant it. Some small, exhausted part of me thought, maybe just sign it and it'll finally be over. That's the part of you they're always counting on, not your love, your exhaustion. But I'd spent 9 years training the part of my brain that doesn't get tired at a negotiating table, and it was already 3 steps ahead of the rest of me. Who drafted this? I asked. Uncle Rick helped, my mother said again. Like repeating it made it more legitimate. Did an attorney review it? Was it filed with probate? Has this even been compared against the will Dad actually signed? Silence. Ethan shifted in his chair. Paige finally put her phone down. We didn't think we needed a lawyer, my mother said. We're family. We thought we could just handle this ourselves. You didn't need a lawyer, I said slowly, because you were hoping the lawyer in the room wouldn't read past the part where it says my name. Nobody said anything to that. Here's what I'd learned about my family a long time ago. In pieces, over years of watching them operate. They don't ask for things directly if they think you'll say no. They build a room around the ask instead. A family dinner, a quick signature, a sticky arrow on page 6, positioned so your eye goes to the line, not the paragraph above it. They'd done it with money my whole life. Small loans that became gifts, gifts that became expectations, expectations that became, eventually, resentment when I stopped supplying them. This was the same pattern, dressed in legal language instead of a sob story, because a sob story hadn't worked on me in years, and someone, probably Uncle Rick, possibly my mother, had decided a stack of paper might succeed where tears had failed. I picked the document back up, not to sign it, to read it the way I read hostile paperwork at work, hunting for the thing that would actually matter. I found it on page 2, In the section describing the estate itself, whoever drafted this had copied the property addresses from somewhere, probably an old county assessor printout, and in doing so, they'd misstated the legal description of one property. Not a typo, a material misstatement, the kind that, paired with an inaccurate valuation basis I could see plainly compared against my father's actual will, made the entire document legally shaky before you even got to the waiver clause. Combine that with the fact that it hadn't been filed with the probate court currently administering my father's actual estate, and what I was looking at wasn't a settlement agreement, it was 3 signatures away from being an unenforceable piece of paper that would have taken a judge about 4 minutes to set aside if I ever tried to contest it, which conveniently, page 6 made sure I couldn't, except I hadn't signed page 6 yet. I need everyone to understand something, I said, and I said it in the voice I use across a negotiating table. Level, unhurried, the voice that doesn't raise because it doesn't need to. This document isn't a settlement, it's a transfer. You're asking me to give up 13 percentage points of ownership and all management authority permanently, and to sign away my right to ever challenge it, in exchange for nothing. That's not fair. That's not what Dad wanted, and I want to be very clear that I'm not going to sign it. My mother's composure cracked first, the way it always does, into something aimed squarely at guilt. After everything this family has been through, you're going to sit there and refuse to help your own brother and sister? I'm not refusing to help. I'm refusing to hand over 1/3 of my inheritance because someone drew an arrow next to a signature line and hoped I wouldn't read what was above it. Ethan's jaw tightened. You always do this. You always have to make it about the fine print. It's family, Claire. You don't need a contract for family. You're right, I said. You don't need a contract for family, which is exactly why you didn't need this one. If this was really about settling things fairly, Dad's will already does that. Equal thirds, no waiver, no 15% skim to Ethan. You didn't bring me a family agreement. You brought me a business proposal disguised as one, and you hoped I'd sign it the way you hoped I'd sign the loan 2 years ago, quickly, quietly, before I had time to think. That's not fair, Paige said, but her voice had lost its edge. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the document. I did something then that I want to explain carefully because I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it was professionally the only responsible thing left to do. I took out my phone, photographed all 6 pages, and set the document back down on the table, unsigned. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to have this reviewed by an actual estate attorney this week. Not because I want to fight, but because Dad's will is already being administered by the court, and anyone can request an accounting of estate assets during probate. If it turns out anyone has already started acting as though this agreement were valid, transferring funds, changing account access, listing properties differently, that's something the court will need to know about, because it would mean someone was administering an estate outside of its actual legal terms. My mother went very still. We haven't done anything like that. Then there's nothing to worry about, and Dad's will stands the way he actually wrote it. Equal thirds, no management fee, no waiver. Ethan's face told me everything Uncle Rick's paperwork couldn't. He wasn't just hoping I'd sign something unfair. He was hoping I'd sign something unfair before I noticed the property title on the Cedar Street building had already been informally reassigned on a rental listing site 2 weeks earlier, something I hadn't known until I searched it in the parking lot after I left, sitting in my car with the engine off, the way you sit when your hands need a minute before they trust the wheel again. There it was, Cedar Street, listed under a new manager's name, Ethan's name, 2 weeks before this settlement was ever put in front of me. He hadn't been asking me to agree to a transition. He'd already made one, and the document on the table wasn't a proposal. It was an attempt to make something already done look consensual, retroactively, with my signature as the missing piece that would make it hold. I didn't go back inside. I didn't need to make a scene in that dining room, because the scene wasn't going to happen there. It was going to happen in an attorney's office on paper in a way that would actually protect what my father built and actually meant to leave me, not in a shouting match I'd lose the memory of by Tuesday. I called the estate attorney handling Dad's probate first thing Monday morning. I told her what I'd found: the document, the waiver clause, the mismatched legal description, and the rental listing showing Cedar Street already reassigned before any agreement had been signed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the sentence I'll remember for a long time. That's not a family disagreement. That's an unauthorized transfer of estate property during active probate. I'm glad you didn't sign anything. The court ordered a formal accounting within 3 weeks. Ethan had, in fact, changed the property management listing and begun collecting a portion of Cedar Street's rental income income directly, using a signature stamp of my father's that Uncle Rick had apparently kept from an old, unrelated document. It wasn't clever, it was desperate, and it was exactly the kind of thing that looks fine at a dining room table and catastrophic under a judge's questions. My mother called me twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. The second one, she cried and said she didn't know what Ethan had done with the property listing, that she'd only wanted us all to move forward together. I believe part of that. I also believe she watched her son slide a waiver in front of her daughter and decided not to ask a single question about page 6 because not asking was easier than knowing. 6 months later, the estate was settled the way Dad actually wrote it, equal thirds. Ethan was required to return the rental income he'd collected without authorization. Paige, to her credit, was the only one who called to apologize. Not for the document, which she said she hadn't fully understood, but for sitting there in silence while I read it. I still haven't signed anything that wasn't in my father's original will. I don't think I ever will. Here's what I learned. Sitting in that parking lot with the engine off, reading a rental listing that told me more than 6 pages of paperwork ever could. The most dangerous things in my family were never shouted across a table. They were slid across it quietly, next to a pen someone had already tested, under a sticky arrow pointing exactly where they hoped you wouldn't look too closely. I didn't inherit a third of an estate that day. I inherited it 8 months before my father died, the moment he signed his own will with his own lawyer, in his own voice, without anyone standing behind his chair. All I did was read page 6 before I picked up the pen. If you've ever had someone hand you something and call it family when it was really just a transaction dressed up in the right words, you know exactly how heavy that pen felt in my hand and how light it felt to set it back down. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.